In a culture with worldviews which once would have been considered inconceivable but are now considered honorable, a small voice cries out in the wilderness. A voice which is unwilling to surrender to the demands or the madness of the woke culture. This voice may be small, and yet it holds great power. Power that cannot be weighed on the scales of a godless culture, but power that will nonetheless stand the test of time, because it is the truth. Welcome, Pilgrims, to the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast. We are glad you are here with us today, and we are hopeful that you will walk away informed, enriched, and equipped to live as pilgrims in a brave new world.
I'm not going to say it today, Mike. I'm not going to say it.
You're not going to say the thing about the brave new world?
Oh my gosh, you beat me to it. So no, I was not going to say it.
Gotcha.
You said it, which is fine, I guess, because I technically didn't say it.
I said it in like more of like an ironic way, though.
Like wondering why I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah.
34 episodes into this thing, and I'm just simply not going to say it anymore. I've decided it seemed to be tradition, but
Sure.
traditions are meant to be broken from what I've been told. So that's what we're doing. We're breaking
It's fine.
traditions.
Do we have another like tagline or something like that? Hi.
Hello, how are you? Nice to meet you. And that's true. Welcome, Pilgrims, to the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast. We are streaming live on YouTube, and so I think last week I actually gave a shout out to Facebook Live, which we have no affiliation with whatsoever. So there was some false advertisement going on.
Nice.
So I want to just own it right out of the gate. We're a show that tries to deal in truth, not misinformation or disinformation. You can go almost anywhere else in the world for that if you want, but
Right.
we stream live on YouTube, and so we got
Good job.
we got some folks joining us tonight. We would love feedback from you. So how can they join in on that, Mike? Do you know?
Well, you can give us feedback live via YouTube if you are tuning in during this podcast. Otherwise, you can feel free to reach out on Facebook. You can feel free to reach out to us on our website. We've got an email inbox as well. Otherwise, if you know Jason and I personally, you can reach out to us personally as well, which is usually how we get the most feedback.
That's true.
But
Most of our feedback has been from folks we know, which is great. But we love the fact that the word's getting out and some other people are joining. So don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. This is, we're trying a new thing. And so we're hoping that maybe this will be an avenue where we can engage a little bit more with our listeners, with our pilgrims. And so we're excited. It gives you a chance, if you're listening live, to, chime in with your questions maybe, or even your comments. And then if we get those throughout the show, we can obviously engage with them during the show.
Sure.
So
for sure.
yeah. So Mike, we got it's Tuesday. This
Tuesday,
in and of
and it's
itself is a bit weird. It's
not even my fault.
Yeah. So what's going on?
Well, you're going camping, right?
Possibly.
No, you're not going camping.
No. Do you want to know where we're going?
Are you shipping off to Boston?
And I never hoist the main stain, I never swallow the protect, and I never veer solo, cause I never sail at all. And I never walk the gangway, and I've never run to bed. And I've never been to Boston in the fall, cause we're the pirate, do not do anything. We just stay alone and lie around. And if you ask us to do anything, we'll just tell you we don't do anything.
Is that a VeggieTales song, though?
It is, yeah. They took a VeggieTales song, and I guess they definitely made it their own. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Man,
but
that just took me on a ride because I thought you were going to play a Dropkick Murphys song because you're going to Boston.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
I thought for sure. I was like, this is a layup for a Dropkick Murphys song.
I was going with that or maybe the Boss Tones, but I didn't do either.
Yeah. Well, you went with Reliant K, which was, oddly enough, like my first concert I went to without an adult, and I didn't know they were a Christian band at the time. I thought they were just a punk band, and then I found out later in life that they were a Christian band, so it made me not like them anymore. But now, full circle, I get to like them again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has, I mean, nothing to do. I don't even remember what was that last band that I thought, was it Not a Surf or whatever? Like I was so
I had
convinced
never heard
that,
of them before.
So this one I pulled. I was gonna do just regular VeggieTales, but I decided, you know what, we're gonna have some fun.
I actually didn't grow up watching VeggieTales, so I'm not like super familiar with VeggieTales.
Yeah, I didn't
They
either.
were like they were like what I made fun of, you know.
Yeah, I
like
get,
when
I get
grew
it.
up.
I think maybe by the time you were born, it might not have been Christian anymore anyway. But when they first came out, I actually was in high school. So weirdly, we were like They Might Be Giants fans and VeggieTale fans. At least the silly songs that they used to come out with.
Yeah.
But the creator of it, Phil Vicker or something like that, he was a Crown College attendee, and I actually worked with a guy who was really good friends with him at college. So
Cool.
fun guy. Anyway,
Fun guy.
we're going fungi, like a fungi,
Okay.
mushroom.
Yeah.
I mean, for those
Gotcha.
that maybe aren't as scientific as you and me,
Often
but
served alongside vegetables.
exactly.
Yes.
Yes, and scraped off steak so you can actually eat it.
I actually prefer the mushrooms on the steak, but
Y-
we can
that-
agree to disagree.
Yeah, that
right?
would be a mistake. Is the way I would say that.
Wow. Okay.
But we are going to Boston. We're a homeschool family, Mike, and so when you're a homeschool family, you kind of get a little bit of flexibility with your field trips. So apparently, one of the field trips we're taking this year is to Boston. We're going to check out Paul Revere's house, going to check out Plymouth Rock, and I don't know, have some fun, I guess.
Just don't wear a red coat. That's
True,
all I've heard.
yeah.
Just don't
The
wear a
red coats are
coat.
coming. I'm just going to walk around and drink tea in my, actually what I'm planning to do, I'm bringing all my Tom Brady Tampa Bay Buccaneers gear with me, and I'm just going to see how many people I can
Wow.
make angry while I'm walking around Patriots
So you're going to
territory.
Boston to start a fight?
Pretty much. I mean, isn't that what people do in Boston?
I think so. Yeah.
just gonna-
You won't have to look very hard for a
I'm
fight.
probably going to avoid Southie or wherever, maybe some of the real bad characters are, but other than that, yeah, I feel confident.
You might find Matt Damon there.
I'm hoping I would do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
At
Bill
one of the
Burr.
Harvard bars.
One of the Harvard bars. Hey, how do you like them apples? So yeah, that's where we're headed. We're leaving. Well, I guess I shouldn't necessarily tell in case anyone's scoping our house or looking to.
Yeah,
maybe.
we're pretty high profile.
Yeah, that's true. So we're leaving sometime between now and next week, and we'll be back anytime between now and next week as well. So.
Sure. Okay.
But we have a big show. Last week we talked about friendship. The week before that, science. I feel like we've been trekking towards the conversation that we're going with tonight for a while. It's been on the plate for a while.
For sure. And I have like an inordinate amount of opinions on this subject for a guy who doesn't have any kids.
Yeah. So tell us what are we talking about tonight, Mike?
Well, we're going to be talking about I don't want to say parenting, but raising children, like raising the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So
and specifically because we don't claim to be anything else. We're a show that aims to look at the world from a Christian point of view, and so we're specifically asking the question: how are we supposed to raise Christian kids in a culture that is pretty Christless? And so that will be one of our efforts tonight, is to try and suss out, hey, let's take a look at the world in which we're living, which obviously that's part of what we do each and every week. But then ask the question specifically, how do we raise our kids, to be God-fearing, God-honoring kids in a world that really seems to be quite different. And so without further hesitation, I couldn't think of anything better, Mike, than to try and give a specific lead in here, so I'm going to go with that.
Teach your children well. Their father's hell did slowly go by, and feed them on your dreams. The one they picked, the one you know by.
great song.
Yeah, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, right?
Is it Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young?
It's
Or
not Young,
just
but
Crosby,
but
Stills, and Nash.
It's Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And I figured if we wanted to get Young in there, you do a heck of a Neil Young impersonation. So
When I'm on, it's on.
it is on. Mike, what are we drinking here? I mean, we're making some weird faces every time I take a sip of this stuff.
All right, so really quick, I don't know, maybe some people with a keen eye have seen over the last couple episodes, I have snuck in, I have a little bit of a whiskey collection Today we're drinking some Lagavulin 16. It's a scotch. It's a peated scotch. It's very smoky.
Oof.
And Jason, you're not used to it, are you?
No, I mean, this is a flavor that I've never tasted in whiskey or scotch or anything before. So
All right. I know we transitioned into this raise your children well, but I have to say something really quick. So specifically about peated scotches, and this isn't just me. This is an experiment I've done with some other friends of mine. The first time I ever drank it, I thought it was awful. Okay? Second time I drank it, I forgot what it tasted like, and I spit it out of pure reaction. The third time I tasted it, I went, this is incredible.
okay.
And that happens with most of my friends. The first time they drink it, they think it's awful.
Yeah.
Second time, it's awful. I'm like, you got to give it 3 times, because once you get past the second time, there's something about it. It starts to taste sweet instead of smoky. I don't know. Anyway.
and I don't. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think it's a bad flavor. It's just I'm not used to it. So I gotta
Yeah.
be honest. Like really smoky anything, I struggle with quite a bit.
And this is like literally moss smoke.
Yeah,
It's
I
from
mean,
like
it's-
a peat bog.
It is bold. It is a bold flavor. But back on topic, I just wanted people to understand why I was making goofy faces during a pretty pleasant song. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. It actually is the scotch that we're drinking tonight. Not sponsoring the show, but if they would like to, we would love to have a conversation.
A
So
favorite of Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec.
yeah, well, and see, I'm learning quite a bit as we go. But our first topic of the night, so we're gonna kind of dive into culture at large, right? Why are we even talking about raising Christian kids in a Christless culture? Well, mostly because our culture is moving in a very predominantly anti-Christian direction. I don't think that that's a surprise to anyone necessarily, but we're going to pull some recent articles. This one comes from September 16th. The title of it from the Washington Examiner is called Anti-White Bias in the Classroom is Real and it's Toxic. This is by Christopher Trimmel. How would you say this? I don't even know how to say his last name, but you can find it. The Pennsylvania State Education Association, the state's largest teaching union, is providing its members with a seminar focused on the New York Times podcast, Nice White Parents. Todd Shepard of Broad and Liberty reported, this podcast describes itself as a series dedicated to building a better school system and what gets in the way. And as this advertisement shows, what gets in the way is merely a trope for blaming white people. The seminar will happen through Zoom over the weekends between October 4th and November. It is a union-funded indoctrination at its worst. It is propaganda seeking to indoctrinate teachers across the state that essentially white parents are the root of all evil when it comes to education problems in our country. Teachers will then pass on this indoctrination to their students. Nice White Parents is a halfway interesting, largely self-absorbed podcast that seeks to blame rich, white New York City liberals for lagging achievement in an urban school. Max Eden, a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, told Broad and Liberty. Another quote here says, at a time when students are facing unprecedented learning loss and at the beginning of what's certain to be another administratively fraught school year, the fact that Pennsylvania's largest teachers union is conducting a lengthy seminar series on this New York Times podcast is worse than a bad joke. It shows that their priorities are on broadcasting culturally left bona fides rather than helping students recover and learn. This is not the first, right? I mean, we've had Zach on the show talking about his experience with, equity and critical race theory. Why is this dangerous for those that are just maybe scratching their head saying, what's the big deal?
Well, it's identity politics. Like what's happening is a boogeyman has been created out of white people. And when you create a boogeyman out of an entire race of people that's pretty unfounded, that usually devolves into violence. I mean, down the line, right? Down the line. And it's really no secret that at least the mainstream narrative is pretty anti-white. There's there's this whole thing you could get into with like the Great Replacement and blah blah blah, and maybe that's for another time. But it certainly does seem that, well, like for example, when the census in the 2020 census came out, you had a bunch of media outlets celebrating the fact that that white people are now kind of going the opposite direction in population, and you also have the public school system parading this like anti-white rhetoric. And when you're raising children in that environment, you are going to raise incredibly insecure white children with a lot of guilt for something that they had nothing to do with, and you are going to enable non-white children to basically bully for no reason these white children. It's something that if you can get them early enough, you can just ingrain it into them. I mean, it's exactly how people talk about racism in general. They're like, oh, they're taught at an early age. It's like, well, you don't get to just teach them to be racist towards somebody else. That doesn't fix the problem.
Yeah.
That's deflection.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think part of the other issue that we've found in this is that a lot of this critical race theory and equity has very deep roots in Marxist ideology, right?
Right.
And part of Marxist communist ideology is to remove God from the equation, right? Because really, I don't remember the exact quote, but Marx himself viewed Christianity specifically, but religion more generally, as the great pacifier of the people, right? So instead of revolting, instead of fighting for equality and equity, they were just pacified by their religious beliefs. So if you can remove that altogether, then they can deal in a more realistic world, and revolution can come.
Yeah, which is so interesting because a lot of his theology revolves around forcefully pacifying populations, through really manipulative means. So in a way, it's almost like projection, right? He's talking about how religions will pacify people as a way for people to take their eyes off the fact that he's trying to do the exact same thing to people. It really just all depends on what you stand for and which set of principles. Like, are you going to lean on the principles of this dude that decided he just knew better? Or are you going to lean on the principles of God?
Yep.
Which isn't just some dude who thought he knew better.
Right, and when you really want to look at equality, I mean, I think if anyone understands Christianity, right, like the Bible is very clear that there is equality in the world. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? Like no man approaches the cross without guilt upon himself, right? And so one of the coolest aspects of Christianity is that it promotes a lot of the same things that some of these ideologies chase. It just does it in a method that actually can pay out true dividends, right? Versus, just leaving people angry and resentful, bitter, divided. There is justice in the cross. There is justice in Jesus Christ. There is justice, in God's law and God's way. It's just given to him to deal with versus man trying to accomplish these things on our own, right? Because we're fallen, right? We're sinners.
Yes.
So, Christian parents, the reason that we continue to bang this gong is the fact that we want you to be aware. This stuff is not going anywhere. In fact, I can't remember, where I read it, but it was again just this week. It seems like it's almost every week, but there was a teacher who said, to ask children to sit down and be quiet is actually racist. It's coming from a position of white privilege.
It's so wild. It's kind of like the accusation that came out a few years ago that SAT tests were racist. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's like all of these different kids were being asked the same questions during the SAT test, but you could draw like a demographical line based on the generalities of like how different races did on the test. So the only conclusion is like, this is racist. That was the conclusion that the media came to.
Right.
And it's like, no, it's not like these questions aren't racist. These questions are just questions.
Right.
So,
yeah, and they don't prove the systemic racism in our culture. I mean, they may show gaps in education, which should be addressed, right? Like that kind of stuff. But at the same time, like you can't, even here, like they want to blame rich white liberals with the reason that urban schools are failing. And it's ironic. I guess
it's really weird because those are the schools that have the most money being pumped into them.
Right.
And they're churning out the most high school dropouts and like kids that test poorly.
Yeah, but it can't be the teachers, and of course the teachers union wouldn't want to come out and say, hey, it's probably you guys, or maybe we should rethink how we're, leveraging our hours, and how we're trying to educate our kids. Like that can't be the problem, right?
Well, I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is the public school system, and everybody listening should pull their kids out. Oh my goodness. Like I'm very opinionated, but I think homeschooling is like the best thing ever.
Yeah, and you might be onto something, and actually the next two things that we're going to discuss are very clearly indicating that as far as a safe space, as many safe spaces as these public schools attempt to have for their students, it seems like they are not very safe spaces for Christian students. We're going to turn to Ohio, where a mayor actually warned his school board during a meeting that they could either resign or face charges for child pornography. And so a mayor of Ohio told all 5 local school board members to resign during a school board meeting or face charges over class material for high schoolers he deemed child pornography. He said, quote, "It has come to my attention that your educators are distributing essentially what is child pornography in the classroom," Hudson Mayor Craig Schubert told the Hudson Board of Education during a meeting on Monday. Quote, "I've spoken to a judge this evening. She's already confirmed that, so I'm going to give you a simple choice. You either choose to resign from this Board of Education or you will be charged," Schubert added, which was met with cheers from the audience.
Yeah, and I saw the video, and I would recommend that people watch it.
I mean, we have it. Should we play it? I mean,
we do?
Just to give some perspective here.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we can do that real quick here.
I'm not going to...
Let's see if we got it. I think we got it. Maybe not. All right. Maybe we don't have it.
All right. Well, folks, look it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's there for sure.
Yeah, essentially all that happens is the mayor comes
we do
in.
have it. Here we go.
We do?
Yep,
Okay.
here we go.
Earl, members of the board, my name is Craig Schubert. I'm the mayor of this city. It has come to my attention that your educators are distributing essentially what is child pornography in the classroom. I've spoken to a judge this evening. She's already confirmed that. So I'm going to give you a simple choice. You either choose to resign from this Board of Education or you will be charged. Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
He should have dropped the microphone right after that.
He could have.
He could have.
I was happy to see that there was cheering.
Yeah.
That there were people that saw it as atrocious. He obviously talked to a judge. To give some indication. I mean, obviously that's pretty much the part that we read, but this was a advanced writing class, so college level writing class in a high school curriculum that they pulled in 642 things to write about, which was a writing prompt found in that book.
Yeah.
And then one of the prompts of that basically was saying, write a sex scene that you wouldn't show your mom. And then the next prompt was rewrite the sex scene from above into one that you would let your mom read. These are for high schoolers, And I mean,
Yeah.
to I guess we want to be
Oh, man.
transparent here. Okay. The school says that was never assigned out to their students. And so this book somehow made it home, and a parent with some due diligence maybe was reading through it and discovered that this was one of the writing prompts that was in the book.
Okay.
And the school board basically came and said, look, we apologize. We're sorry. We're embarrassed. We've never assigned this, but we're ashamed that we didn't vet this better than we did. But that's not necessarily an excuse that, is good enough. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, so I had a conversation with my mom about this kind of idea, and I used some pretty harsh language, and it's really that, like, isn't anybody else concerned with the fact that these freaks in the public school system feel entitled to teach our children about sex?
Yeah.
Like, that's weird to me. It's weird to me that they believe it is their responsibility to do that. They believe that you are doing your own children a disservice if you don't let these people, these strangers,
Teach your children.
about sex.
Right.
Like, that to me is like the weirdest thing ever. Like, why is that even something that anybody got together and agreed upon? Like, yeah, let's put all these kids in a room and have this like
Weirdo.
totally strange adult stand in front of the room and teach these like 5th grade kids,
Right.
about reproduction. Like, that's weird to me. That's strange.
Yeah, and I think it's also disappointing that parents have abdicated this responsibility to the school. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of times, right, like, just thinking back to my life, and I love my dad. He was a good dad. He was involved in my life. He was a very good father. But I remember, like, when I was like 17 or 18, my dad coming into the room, sitting down on my bed, like, I could tell something was up, and I'm like, oh man, what am I in trouble for this time? Like, that's all I was thinking. And he's like wiping sweat from his face and very distraught and stressed out. And he was just like, son. And I was like, oh no, this is it. And I'm just like, Dad, I already know. And he was like, you do? And I'm like, yeah. And he was like, good talk. And that was it, like that was it. But, I mean, I understand, like I've even questioned, I got a 13-year-old son who I want to allow to be a kid and innocent as long as I can, right?
Yeah.
His exposure to things like that is very limited. It has probably come from cousins or whatever.
Sure.
But the reality is, like, I want him to be aware, but I also want him to remain innocent as long as he can, right? And I would never, ever allow a school to give him the conversation about the birds and the bees. I'm sorry, right? Like, it's
Right.
just not going to happen.
Yeah, and we have a friend who has kids that go to public school who he has been pretty consistent in like giving his kids like a note to bring to the teacher to excuse them of like those portions and parts of like lesson plans and stuff like that. So that's something that you can do if you have no other option but to put your kids in public
Right.
school. But then they're still going to be exposed to all of the other children who have been exposed to whatever.
Right.
And unless you're willing to parent like a hawk,
Right.
that stuff's going to seep in.
For sure. And I'm, again, like, for me, it's always been, when's the appropriate time? Now, we've talked to him about reproduction. When both of his sisters were born, we kind of explained how
Right.
that all works in age-appropriate ways, and we found some very good Christian books, but it's never going to land in his lap like this, right? And
Mhm.
and the fact that you're supposed to prompt a high schooler to write something about a sex scene that they couldn't tell their parents, like, even that is just, I mean, even if it was just about a sex scene, like, that's one thing, but it's also done in a way that's like, hush hush, don't tell your mom, make sure she can't find out, what would be so embarrassing. Like, that's just
Right.
wrong. That's just
Yeah.
wrong on so many levels, man.
Yeah. Yeah. We live in a day and age where we need parents to start standing up and like taking ownership of their children.
Yeah.
And I know that probably sounds weird to say, but like nobody is responsible for your kids but you. And I've even had this conversation with people. It's like, well, if like a lot of people feel too, like if their kids do something wrong, that it's like it doesn't fall on them as a parent. And it's like, no, you are the responsible adult.
Right.
Like, when your kids do something wrong, that is your
Yeah,
responsibility.
you're liable for that.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like if my dog went out and attacked somebody, I can't just say, oh, it was my dog's fault. People look at me as the responsible guardian of this dog. You know, I have to take responsibility. Same thing with your kids.
How much more with kids, right?
Exactly.
Just before people,
Exactly.
think we're making a comparison with kids and dogs, like how much more responsible are you with your children, than you are even with your own
Right.
animal? You know what
And
I mean?
I'm not saying you should keep your kids on a leash or anything like that, but you should certainly be disciplinary. You should train
Right.
them in the way that they should be.
Right.
And then you should correct them. I mean, you should be observing their behavior and observing the way that they are interacting with the world, and make corrections as corrections need to be made. Be an involved parent.
Right.
Really, it was the generation, like probably Gen X, like the helicopter parents. I mean, they perfected this idea of just sit your kids down in front of the TV, let the TV raise them. As a matter of fact, send them to daycare, let the daycare provider raise them.
Right.
Send them to public school, let the teachers raise them. And then it's like by the time they're adults, they're like, well, I never taught my kid how to be that way. And it's like, well, you didn't teach your kid anything.
You didn't teach your kid much anything, right? And I do think, one thing we just have to be aware of, right, is that, I think there was this time where it was like these parents said, I want to give my kids what I never had, right?
Yeah.
Like every generation attempts to give their kids a better life than what they had, right? But what are you trading? What's the trade-off there, right? So
Right.
whatever time you don't get with your kids, whatever time that you're spending at the office trying to make money so that you can provide all these things and all this stuff for your children, like what's the trade-off on that, right? And in
Yeah.
a lot of ways it's time. It's having the influence in their life to actually, have the conversations and teach the things that we ought to. And sadly, I think a lot of times parents have just abdicated that. They're like, the school will take care of that for
Yeah.
us.
Exactly. And I am very fortunate to have two very good parents, and I believe that they did everything that they thought that they should do. But I would never look back, and my mom worked, right? My mom worked, my dad worked, but I would never go back in time and say, man, I wish we had more money. But I would say, I wish I had more time with my parents when I was growing up.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yep.
mean? And, man, like my mom and we didn't really get to know each other until I was like an adult, like after college. You know what I'm saying? So just if anybody's listening and you find yourself in a position where it's like, oh, you know what? I really don't get to spend much time with my kids. I would urge you to evaluate yourself.
Yeah.
And try to figure out a way to be more involved in your family's life. So
Yep, and I would echo that 100%. I think again, like parents, we have to be involved. If
Mhm.
we're not raising our kids, somebody else will. And there already is progressive. I mean, there has been for decades, right? I mean, we remember what Hillary Clinton says. It takes a village to raise a child. Like that was her mentality, right? And I don't want the village raising my kid,
Right.
Because if the village represents what I see the village representing, I don't think that they should be given the ability to do that. Now, we personally have chosen to homeschool more than one reason, but our kids have two of our kids that were school aged. Our youngest just started school this year,
Yeah.
but our other two kids had both been in public schools at various points, right? And then we tried private school, and now we homeschool, right? And my wife does a very good job, right?
Yeah.
But just to be able to shape their minds, right? That we get to do that with our worldview, with our belief system, with our faith system. We get to be the ones building those foundational blocks in their life instead of, I think like Zach said when he was on the show with us, right? Way back when we, had him on the show. He said, right, like a lot of times as parents, you're going to spend a large percentage of your time trying to undo or talk against some of the points that the world is making when they're trying to
Yeah.
raise your kids.
If you are an involved parent.
Right. If
yes.
you're trying to be an involved parent, yet
Yeah.
sending them to public school. And
Yeah.
so his whole point on that, and ours as well, is be proactive. Like, don't
Mhm.
be defensive. Be on the offense as far as shaping your child's mind. And that is definitely one area where we would call all Christian parents and all parents in general, right? Regardless if you're Christian or not, just be involved. You don't get these years back.
And there's a narrative that has been, it's been, I guess, pushed for probably longer than I've been alive, that that parents don't know what's best for their own children. You know what I mean? And they feel like they have to, really like public figures, whether it's politicians, celebrities, newscasters, whatever, public figures in general feel like they know what's best for your kid. And like, what's a recent example? It's like, well, you know, you could probably search not for very long and find an article talking about how, you know, oh, my kid made fun of a boy that was kissing another boy, and now I'm being called a bigot by the school. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you taught your kid to think that that's weird. You're a bigot. I mean, how silly is that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and now we're having issues now as well, where if a kid is raised to believe in evolution, they're called an idiot. The parents are like targeted basically because they're brainwashing their kids into this misinformation and blah, 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 blah. So all I want to say is don't let that stuff bother you. You know what's best for your kid. Other people don't know what's best for your kid.
Right.
The only person who should be making the decision of what's best for your child is you.
Yep.
Unless you've been found to not, you know, child protective services and
Right.
stuff like that. I mean, there's nuance to everything, but in general, the authority of a child is its parent.
Yep. And that's a
So
great
lean
point.
into that.
Yep. And we're going to go to another video clip here that shows a gal who has had enough with her school district. We want to go ahead and give the disclaimer that this video deserves. This mom comes in with direct quotes from a book, which many of our listeners will probably find offensive, and the only thing I want to say to that is good. I mean, you should find it offensive. This mom is offended, but she is quoting to you what this book said, and this book was in a middle school, and so we're gonna play that clip, and then we'll talk about it on the back end here. But I just want to, if you have kids that are listening to this with you, we'll either say earmuffs now, although again, you know, this is reality, and so it is shocking, it is disturbing. It is stuff that we would typically bleep out if we were playing it for different reasons. But this woman is not trying to be shock jock. She's just trying to tell the truth and let the truth land where it should.
Yep.
So here we go.
All right, well, I'm just thankful that y'all don't have the ability to make a mask mandate. And tonight I was going to talk about the need for a second high school, but I was sidetracked by, for the boys, pussy or the idea of pussy or the idea of pussy. A Mexican is a Mexican is a Mexican. Take her out back, we boys figured, then hand on the titties. Put it in her coin box, put it in her cornhole, grab a hold of that braid, rub that calico. You can find that on page 39 of the book called Out of Darkness, which you can find at Hudson Bend Middle School and Bee Cave Middle School. All right, not gonna lie, I had to Google cornhole because I have the game in the back of my yard, but according to Wikipedia, cornhole is a sexualist slang vulgarism for anus. The term came into the use in the 1910s in the United States as verb form to cornhole, which came into usage in the 1930s, means to have anal sex. I do not want my children to learn about anal sex in middle school. I have never had anal sex. I don't want to have anal sex. I don't want my kids having anal sex. I want you to start focusing on education and not public health.
Stone, you're on.
Officials, you are supposed to be educating our children. Do
Bell,
not
thank you.
teach them
Ms.
about
Bell, thank
anal
you.
sex.
Thank you, Ms. Bell.
Thank
Cara
you.
Bell, and then
So I think in maybe different contexts that's a modern day Karen, what people would say typically, right? If you're just trying to if you're trying to dismiss the point that she was trying to make,
I
right?
guess.
I mean, she's an angry mom.
Yeah, she doesn't have the right haircut to be a Karen, but No, I think that she makes a good point.
Yeah.
Obviously, well, and that's the thing, is she's not even just trying to be a provocateur.
Right.
Like, she's reading from the book that is available in the library. And
At a middle school, dude. We're
Yeah, and
we're talking what, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th grade,
Right.
whatever
So,
the case may be.
I remember being a middle schooler. Do you remember being
Yeah.
a middle schooler? I would have loved to read a book like that. I would have. I thought I was so mature. I thought I was an adult. I thought I was ready to handle all of that stuff. I look at a middle schooler now, and I look back at myself as a middle schooler, and I'm like, that is a young child, a young and impressionable child.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, oh man, the lack of care that has gone into that school system just by allowing books like that in the library. Like, it blows my mind that anyone would have like thought that that was okay. The only conclusion I can come to, okay, there are two. One is that it was nefarious. Two, nobody looked.
Right. Yeah, and so the school district did confirm. This is an article that kind of described what we listened to there. But Lake Travis Independent School District confirmed on Thursday that it pulled the book from the libraries of its 2 middle schools following Bell's complaint. Thank God, right?
Yeah.
But a little too late, right?
Yes.
They said, quote, "A district possesses significant discretion to determine the content of its school libraries. A district must, however, exercise its discretion in a manner consistent with the First Amendment." The spokesman added, "A district shall not remove materials from a library for the purpose of denying students access to ideas which the district disagrees. A district may remove materials because they are pervasively vulgar or based solely upon educational suitability of the books in question." End quote. I mean, that to me, that is liberal mumbo jumbo. It's the same reason why parents have been upset because in the public library they refuse to block access to internet pornography sites, and you got some dude looking at porn while some girl's trying to play Dora the Explorer right next to him. Like, come on. We live in a free country. I understand that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We live in a country where freedom of speech is protected, right? The First Amendment means something. But at the same time, to abuse that, if we're banning people on all these media outlets because of misinformation, but are trying to stand behind allowing some guy, access to pornography, or some kids access to pornography because we're going to be protecting the First Amendment.
Yeah.
That's a joke.
Okay, so the First Amendment was not written under the idea that our children would all be taught by the state.
Right, that's true. Yeah, you're
You know what I mean?
absolutely right.
Like, and this is a problem. So when people say that they don't like socialism, you always get like liberals saying like, "Well, what about the public school system, or what about fire departments? And it's like, this is literally an example of why it fails. Like, socialism might work if you have one people group that all believes the same thing.
Right.
They're all subscribing to the same theology. They're all subscribing to the same political system and everything like that. But when you have like all these different cultures that are fighting for the attention of a child, you're going to get some people that say, "I don't understand what's so bad about this." And then you're going to get other people saying, "This is horrible. I can't believe you would even allow this in a school."
Right, and they obviously pulled the book, right? But they wanted to do it with a disclaimer that said, you know what, we don't necessarily agree with this content, but we agree that children who want access to this content should have access to it. And it's
so
like,
it's moral
dude,
relativism.
Don't exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's pluralism. It's moral relativism. I think in the same breath almost, and I don't know exactly what state it was, but there was a coach that had gotten in trouble because he was leading his players in prayer after the game, and they came out and said this week that he no longer can do that, right? So the school can no longer allow a coach to pray with any players that desire to stick around and pray, but we can have books like this that are talking about explicitly pornographic content, teaching our kids things that, it's sodomy, right? Like, not that far back there were laws literally on the books that would have thrown you into prison for sodomy,
right?
And now we're promoting it as if it's something to get excited about.
Yeah, this is why more than ever, more now than ever, I'm really encouraged by how many people are kind of pulling their kids out of public school. On Facebook now, I'm seeing posts like once, twice a week of people saying, hey, we're pulling our kids out of public school. Does anybody know of any educators that can come in and help teach my child? And then there's like all these homeschool collectives that are starting even locally here
Yeah, for sure.
of a bunch of parents that are like fed up with
Enough's
the public
enough,
school
right?
system.
Yeah.
And a lot of teachers that are also fed up with the public school system, and now they're privately teaching children in these homeschool collectives and
Right.
stuff like that. Like, that is amazing. That's the kind of stuff that we need more of, is people taking back their freedom and kind of rejecting what the state is shoving down their throat. I mean, libertarians must be just like so excited.
Right. Yeah. And I think, just like anything else, even in the free market, right? Like, this is how things correct themselves.
Yeah.
But, I think definitely what's being exposed, and I know we've already hit on this, but we're going to continue to hit on it because it's a gong that we're trying to actually bang, is that parents, you have to be involved. Some parent was involved, or some student had a good enough relationship with their parent that when they found this book in their library, they went and they talked to a parent. And somehow this parent found out about this book, praise God, and brought it up to the attention of the school board and called them out on it.
Yeah, how many kids would just keep that to themselves, out of fear to talk to their parent because they're not comfortable enough with their parent to talk about that kind of stuff.
Right.
I mean, I think that what you just said goes into a very, very deep thing that people are afraid to talk about.
Yeah.
Is like you and your children should be on the level where if a kid feels convicted about something, they know they can go to you to talk to you about it.
Right, and that you're not going to chew them out or, rip their head off or, embarrass them or make them the problem, that you're going to take it where it needs to go. And, again, I don't know what other method this gal had than to use the method that she did and to say the things that she did to wake people up. Because to be quite honest, somebody picked that book. That book did not walk into the library on its own. Somebody picked that book and brought it into the library, and children were reading it. And they're kids. They're kids, dude. My kid is a, let's see, what is he? He's an 8th grader this year. So he would fit right into that category of someone who could have stumbled across that book, and it was written as a historical piece, right? So it was about a black boy and a Mexican girl in like 1937, during this historical time. So I mean, even I think about Huck Finn and all these other things, like a school would use that to try and tell history, but at the same time, you're getting graphic sexual content, and I just cannot believe it, dude. I can't believe it.
Yeah. Well, then I'm glad that the school didn't do this, but they had an opportunity to just hide behind it like, hey, whoa, we're not saying it was good. We're just saying that it happened.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, the Bible is not allowed in school, but, Mein Kampf is, or whatever else, you know what I mean? Like, it's just...
Is Mein Kampf allowed
I
in
don't
school?
know. I'm not sure. I guess I shouldn't say that, but I know when I was going to school, you could find a Bible, in the library, but I don't think that you can anymore.
Well, I went to a very, very liberal school for 11th and 12th grade, and I've got a lot of stories about that, about stuff that, like, I mean, if it had been brought up to, like, I don't know, in a legal way, a lot of action could have been taken. But a lot of the parents were very, like, liberal as well, so nothing ever happened, right? And I was so young and naive, and my parents were very uninvolved in my education and my upbringing at that point in my life, like 16, 17 years old, that no one ever did anything. But I will say I had a Tai Chi class. It was like first hour. Right?
Is that like Tai Bo, or what is Tai Chi?
It's like it's that really, really slow martial art. You know?
Gotcha, yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. It was great to wake up, like, get to school and you do Tai Chi. The problem is the teacher was like a fan of Taoism, so spelled Tao, right, like Tao. And he was giving the I Ching, which is like the Taoist. It's not
mantra
a gospel,
or
but
whatever.
like, he was giving that book out to students so that they could study the I Ching and, like, get better at Tai Chi and stuff like that. Well, that's a no-go. There was, like, one conservative student who brought the book home to their parents, and the parents made a big stink And it was like, hey, buddy, you can't give any religious material to kids. It doesn't matter if it's Eastern mythology.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
So at least they were being consistent in that manner.
That's true. I mean, that part's at least good. At least there was some consistency.
At the same time, the English teacher was also trying to convince a straight boy that it's okay if you want to come out as gay. I mean, like, she was basically saying, like, we're all pretty sure that you're gay. So if you want to come out, and he's like, I'm not gay though. Like,
are you calling me gay?
Yeah. And when that happened back in high school, I just thought it was hilarious that, like, my best friend was like, the English teacher called him gay. Like, I thought that was the funniest thing. But now I'm looking back at it, I'm like, that English teacher was trying to convince a 17-year-old boy
in the midst
gay.
of his identity crisis, central or whatever, right? Yeah, and I mean, I think, again, like, we're banging the gong that, if you're hearing this stuff and you're, like, totally shocked as a parent that you would find this in a public school, what I'm trying to tell you is you probably don't know what's going on in your public school system.
Right.
And again, I come from a family, a long lineage of teachers, public school teachers, right? Like, none of the teachers in my family taught in private schools. They were all public school teachers. They all love the Lord. And so it's not like Christians can't be teachers or that there aren't good teachers out there. That's not what we're trying to say.
Right.
But there is an agenda, right? A good friend of mine, friend of the show, he's a public school teacher, and I was talking to him just the other day because someone posted pictures of their school getting back into session, and again, there was the equality flag hanging all over. There was safe space signage everywhere. Like, there is an agenda with our kids. There is an agenda, and it's not a Christian agenda, right? The Christian agenda is banned from public schools. And it may still have bits and pieces, and there may be teachers like this teacher. He loves the Lord, so there's no problem with him specifically. But he's in a system that is and a worldview and an ideology that runs counter to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that's what parents need to be aware of. Yeah. You're not sending your children to a safe space. Like, they will find safe spaces carved out for them in those schools, but they're going to be safe spaces for non-binary students. They're going to be safe spaces for transgender students and, students of, minority ethnicities, but it's not safe spaces for Christianity. It's not a safe space for the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right. And I think that that's a really important thing for you to say too, Jason. Like, I personally don't have any issues with most school teachers. I'm not trying to say that school teachers are bad. Like you were saying, it's like, I'm trying to say that the system, the system is
a secular system.
Exactly. And really, kind of to your point of, like, hey, if you're shocked about this stuff that's going on, it's like, don't be surprised. This is not a Christian system.
Right.
It's not. It has been, like, every piece of Christian theology that was ever intertwined into the inner workings of our country, which is how it was created, by the way, everyone
the foundation,
listening. It's all been removed by lawyers who are basically trying to turn everything into like a subjective argument.
Right. Erase that piece of history, and any of our forefathers that were simultaneously slave owners and Christ followers,
right.
It's like they're discredited,
right.
because of a part of our history that we've moved away from. Yeah. We're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation and shift gears, moving, basically specifically into, how do we raise Christian children in a Christless culture? So we've seen what the Christless culture looks like. We've seen some of the ramifications of parents, not being involved. But when we come back, we're going to try and talk specifically about how do we raise our children to know Jesus, to love Jesus, and to honor Jesus in a world that wants nothing to do with it. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. If you're convinced that vaccination mandates from a government with a sketchy and unethical past are morally good, but believe biblical mandates from a holy and perfect triune God are morally wrong, it may be time to get off social media and tune in to the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast. Hello, Pilgrims. This is Jason from the Pugnacious Pilgrim, reminding you that there's a lot of misinformation out there. So, if you're looking for truth that doesn't change based on the winds of culture, we invite you to join us every week for the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast, where we take a look at the world from a Christian's point of view. We won't pretend to have all the answers, but we do promise to do our best at discerning truth from error and having some fun along the way. So, if you're looking for something different than you've already found so far, we encourage you to give us a try. And if you like what you hear, do us a favor and tell your friends. For more information about the Pugnacious Pilgrim, check out our website at www.pugnaciousPilgrim.com. Thanks again, Pilgrims, and stay pugnacious. Welcome back, Mike.
Welcome.
Do you feel, it feels a little bit more professional for us to have to sit through the commercial. How do you feel about that?
I feel encouraged.
Yeah,
That's a great commercial.
I'm typically adding that stuff post, so we don't, we go to the, hey, we'll be right back, and then we come immediately right back.
Like after 2 seconds.
Yeah, I don't really know what to do with my hands during the commercials now.
Maybe we should come up with a clip.
There you go. Like we could put our logo up there or something. You know what would be good? What would really be good is if we actually had some sponsors for the podcast.
Yeah.
Because then they could give us some commercials or some items that we could put up there. So if there are any listeners that maybe have a small business and would like to jump in and support us in any capacity.
Like, for example, somebody who erects metal buildings, or somebody who maybe owns a welding shop, or things of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. Even a Pugnacious Python bowling league, right? Like,
it could be
throw some money our way. we have small expenses each and every month. We rarely talk about finances, and Mike and I do this because we love Jesus. We love to discuss things that are important. We love thinking about things from eternal perspective. And so we're going to continue to do this nonetheless.
Yeah.
But
and we love hanging out with each other, too.
That's true.
So, this is something that we were doing before there was a microphone in our face.
That is true, which is probably why for us it's a little bit natural. But if you would like to get the word out about your business, about what you do on a regular basis, we would love to partner with you however we can to try and maybe tackle two birds with one stone, if you will. And especially if you're a Christian company, we would love to promote a Christian company on this show. So if that's something that interests you, get a hold of us at info@pugnaciousPilgrim.com or send Mike a text and he'll handle the administrative details with you.
Thanks for volunteering that.
Hey, no problem, dude. I'm going to Boston, so I'm not going to be around. But yeah, I don't know. I know this has been on your heart. You and I just, in the back alleys have had these conversations for years now, really, right? Like, and as a man who has 3 kids and you, a man who obviously desires to raise a family and raise kids too, you're passionate about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's not forget, for a brief period of time, I was also handling the youth ministry at Earl Church.
That's true.
For a brief period of time. So I'm not completely inexperienced when it comes to teaching kids, I guess, but at the same time, the irony is not lost on me about a 29-year-old single man talking about parenthood. I understand it's a pretty taboo thing. I've gotten into a lot of discussions with parents that are like, oh, you just don't understand. Wait till you have kids. You'll completely change your mind. To which I say, me having kids is not going to remove my principles. Right. It's not going to make me go, oh, yeah, you're right. This is way too hard. I should probably just give up.
Peace out. I'm giving them to the public schools.
And we've had this conversation too, Jason, is you don't abandon your principles just because things are difficult. That's when you press in your principles even harder.
Yeah.
That's how you find motivation is by having these strong principles. So with that caveat out of the way, let's talk about this.
Yeah, and I guess I would also just to add, we care, right? Because as a couple guys who are Christians, right, we look at our culture right now, and one thing that I can tell you for sure that we need is kids to get raised knowing the truth, understanding the truth, so that they can press into a Christless culture with the gospel of Jesus Christ, because, we know the results of social media. We know the depression numbers. We know the amount of suicides that are taking place. The world has no hope to offer anybody that is lasting, right? Like all the joy, all the hope, all the happiness, like we just see it has left people in a perpetual state of confusion, chaos, and hopelessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if our kids are equipped with the gospel of Jesus Christ, even now, if they're going to public schools or hanging out with friends at the basketball court or whatever kids do nowadays on Fortnite or whatever, right? They can bring the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. But that's only if those kids are equipped.
Right.
Your public school is not going to equip kids with the gospel. The Sunday school lesson that they get 1 hour a week is not going to counter what they get 90% of the time, either on social media, on TV, or at school. It's going to take intentional effort from parents to lead their children towards the truth, and then equip those kids to bring that truth with them wherever they go, and to be difference makers, to be ambassadors for the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right. And this is a call for transparency and some like serious introspection, because I feel like a lot of Christian parents look at their children growing up and they go, how did it come to this? Like, how did it become this way? And, a lot of the times I feel like parents, they feel like they're doing the right things, but kind of like what you're saying, Jason, it's like they're going to church on Sunday, and that's like kind of it. Maybe they'll do like a small group like once a week or something like that, but they're not getting involved in like devotionals or like praying with their kids and like making the Word of God a daily thing. And your kids will pay attention to that. If you call yourself a Christian person and nothing about your daily life is following Christ, they're going to see that.
Right.
Like no matter and this is one thing that I feel like people don't ever truly understand here on earth, is that you can say all the right things all you want, but if you're not actually like acting those things out, none of your words mean anything, especially with kids. Kids need to see you being consistent,
right,
and kids need to see you living the life you claim to live. Because if you're just claiming to live it, but you're not actually living it, kids are way, way, way smarter and more observant than you think.
right. And I think, too, the reality is what you would teach them in that scenario is lip service, right?
Yep.
And that's not truth, right? Like,
No.
we know the right thing to say in the right situation, and then we know that we can be whoever we want to be or whoever we're going to be in every other situation, right?
Yep.
And so, I mean, as a father who's currently raising 3 kids, right? My oldest being 13, my youngest being 5, I can tell you the amount of times that I've shared the gospel with my children and still asking myself, like, do they get it? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if they do. And then I look back to my life, right? Like, I was raised in the church. I'm very thankful. I have the foundation of Sunday school. I have the foundation of Awana. I have the foundation of a solid youth group where the gospel was preached every Sunday. And yet I remember that when I walked, when I graduated and went into the Navy, like, it was this kind of question mark, like, who is Jesus really, right? Like, so we can't just lean on the fact that, man, I've told them that 10 times. Like, you got to tell them consistently, constantly, ask questions, be prompting, like, my kids know the right answers, right? So we'll, even tonight, like, I had devotion before we even podcasted when I was laying my girls down for bed, and, they knew the right answers, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was sufficient, right? So I had to intentionally, like, really plug in and say, hey, what does that mean? So, like, for example, tonight it was on being washed, by our sins being washed away by the blood of Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked Joey, our 5-year-old, I'm like, why are our sins washed away? Jesus, you know? Well,
You're not
that's
wrong.
right. That could have been sufficient, but I pressed in and I said, well, Joey, what does that mean? How come our sins are washed away by Jesus? She didn't know.
Right. She
So
probably knew.
Right.
But she might not understand at this point.
Exactly. But, I guess the point that I'm trying to make, and it's not that I'm expecting my 5-year-old to be able to, tell me all 5 points of Calvinism, although I wouldn't mind. But, really it's just trying to make that heart connection, because even if you have the right answers, the Pharisees had the right answers. They just totally missed the point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think it's also understanding that you're trying to shepherd your child's heart. You're not trying to pass information onto them. You're trying to lead them towards gospel transformation, to legitimately have the freedom of the gospel opened
Right.
up to them, so that they can put their faith and their trust and their hope in Jesus, and then allow that to transform everything that they do. But that doesn't come just because you do a devotion together as a family. You
That's
have to
true.
really know your child, and you have to press in and ask questions and be creative and do it like you would try and do anything that you're
Right.
trying to be successful at.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's I think that's a really great and topical story, because sometimes, like you said, even like pressing in and doing devotionals and stuff like that, it's like that's not going to complete the equation necessarily. It'll put all the right numbers in place,
Right.
right? But just I guess an anecdote from my childhood, and Jason, I'm sure that you'll be able to relate with this, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be able to relate with this. You'll be able to relate from both sides, from being a kid and from being the parent of a kid who's very inquisitive in your oldest. You don't really start to understand things until you start asking the right questions. It's not really about having the right answers at that point. It's about asking questions that will help your brain start to kind of like be wrapped around like this kind of stuff. So creating an environment where you are encouraging your children to be able to ask difficult questions without being laughed at, without
Right.
being
Yeah.
like told that they're being an idiot.
Yeah.
Like sometimes like my experience in church the couple times I went as a kid is like if I asked a question, I get laughed at. You know what I mean? So like don't be like that.
Yeah.
But the things that I learned the most about, I remember growing up, I'd have this like encyclopedia, and I would like read this thing religiously, and then which is funny because I didn't have God in my life, so I read the encyclopedia religiously.
Instead,
And then before bed every night, I would just be like, Mom, can you just ask me questions? She'd be like, about what? And I'd be like, just ask me questions about lizards. And she'd just ask me questions like, how do are lizards reptiles or amphibians? And then and then you start like getting into this this train of thought where you're really inquisitive.
Right.
And until you can encourage your kids to become inquisitive about what the Word of God says, you should be pressing toward that mark, in my opinion, because I feel like that was where the most spiritual growth happened for me as well, and is continuing to happen,
Right.
is because I've got all these questions
Right.
that I have to ask people who have a better understanding of me or than me.
Yeah, and I that's a great point, Mike, that I think, it feels sometimes like we have to have all the answers, right, in order to be in a right standing with God. But to the point that you just brought up, right, like sometimes it's better to have that humble, contrite heart where we're asking questions, but still, going to God to find the answers, right? And so I think even to the fall, right, like, why did Adam and Eve fall? Well, the devil came and tempted them, right? He tempted them essentially with, is God God? Is life good? And am I satisfied in him, right? Like those aren't bad questions to ask, right? Those
No.
are really, really, really good questions to ask. The problem comes with where do we find the answers, right?
Right.
And so I think, to be honest, a lot of people will ask the question, but then they go to all these other outlets in the world to try and find the answers, and all they're going to find is confusion or disappointment or hopelessness, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to eventually turn to hopelessness in God, whereas God's word, if you press in and really understand, God is faithful to his people. Like I'm reading Isaiah right now, and it is such a beautiful book showing God's faithfulness, even in the midst of his discipline of his people. Like he's telling them, like Cyrus is going to come. I am empowering him to wipe out this community, to take over the world, to destroy, to steal, to have all this power, right? But ultimately, all the power that he's going to have is given to him by me. He doesn't even acknowledge me, but I'm using him so that I can not only discipline my people, but then reveal my glory to the world.
Yeah.
Like, that's a God who is faithful to his word. It's not fun. It's not happiness. There is discipline when it comes to living a godless life, right? Like, God has told us what happens when we worship idols instead of him, right?
Yes.
But he's still faithful, and he tells Israel throughout this, I am with you. I have called you by name. You are mine. And he leads them to the fullness of joy their hearts were created to find in him, but he has to break them of all these bondages and sin and slavery that they have chosen willfully to walk into instead.
Well, what's amazing to me is that whole recollection of yours from Isaiah came from a very, very simple question that you asked about, basically from Adam and Eve to like why did we fall, to who should we go to, why is God reliable, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think one of the main issues with modern parenting and modern teaching and modern everything is that you have these kids that don't ask these super, super simple questions until they're adults.
Yeah.
And now who are they going to ask? What are you going to, like, Google it? Like, what is the meaning of life? You know, like, stuff like that. I saw somebody say this the other day about the actor Jim Carrey. So Jim Carrey has, like, gone down the rabbit hole. I mean, he's, like, certified, like, kind of a nut job.
I mean, he followed this whole secret thing. For a while, he was, like, the secret spokesman or whatever.
But I saw somebody put in the comment section of a video, like, Jim Carrey is just like any of us, but he didn't start asking the important questions until he turned 50.
Yeah.
And that's why he's crazy. It's because basically what they were saying was he avoided all the important questions of life until he was too old to really wrap his head around it.
Yeah.
And that really struck me. And kind of the same thing happened to me. Like, in my early 20s, I started asking all these existential questions that, like, really in Christian households, you're having like 5, 6, 7-year-old kids ask these questions of their parents, and their parents are answering them and pointing them towards the objective truth in Scripture, rather than waiting for their kids to just figure it out themselves and then ask these questions and hope that they fall upon, like, good ears to teach them about it. So teach your kids in the way they should be.
Yeah, exactly. Like train up your children in the way they should grow, right? So that when they are older, they won't depart. But the reality is, Mike, and I think you already hit on this to at least a certain extent, the parents have to be in a place where they themselves can answer these questions, right?
Yeah.
And not only can they answer the questions, right? Maybe the question gets asked, and to have the humility to say, I don't really know. Let's go to the Word of God and figure that out together, right?
And that's good for a kid to hear too.
It is. The problem, though, is that really, where are our passions, right? So I've evaluated this myself, right? And this was a challenge for me, and it still is, right? So I'm not trying to claim like, whoa, look at me, right? I'm really saying that, even to the last few years, right? Like I would run through the tradition of doing Bible study with my kids because it's the right thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But am I truly invested into that time? Do I truly look at it as if it is an opportunity for me to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with my kids, who are my primary mission field, my family, right?
Yeah.
And the answer is, I was checking it off the list. And you could tell that by the amount of passion that I poured into it. Now, at first, I was going overzealous, right? Like, okay, let's all sit down. We've eaten dinner together. Now we're going to have this hour-long Bible study, and 2 minutes in, I've lost the room, right?
Yeah.
You can't do that either. You got to contextualize to the attention span of your kids. But at the same time, the kids will understand, does Dad really care about this? Does he really care, or is he rushing through it so he can get to football?
Yeah.
Is he rushing through it so he can get to baseball? Is he rushing through it so he can give us kisses and go do whatever he wants to do?
They'll figure it out.
They absolutely will.
Yeah.
And so the question is, are you really taking the time? Are you really spending the energy to shepherd your children's heart? There is nothing of more significance, parents, and I mean this. I absolutely mean this. God has given you children. He has placed them into your hands as their shepherd, and he will hold you accountable for how you shepherd them. Are you legitimately taking that opportunity? Are you a good steward of your children's hearts? And will you faithfully stand before the Lord on Judgment Day and say, I did the best I could? Or, like me, just a couple years ago, are you going to evaluate the time and energy and effort that you put into training your children and raising them up to know the Lord and saying, you know what, they deserve better than this from me. They certainly deserve better than the amount of time that I'm giving them compared to the amount of time that I'm giving to the TV, to Netflix, to social media, to Facebook, to Instagram, to Fortnite, to whatever it is, right? Are our children getting our best, or are they getting leftovers?
Yeah. I wish I had like more experiential knowledge of this, because like I understand in principle what the right things to do are, but I know for sure that when I have kids, it's going to be way harder than I anticipated, and I'm going to fall short a lot. But I think that also provides another great experience with your kids, is like being faithful in admitting when you've made a mistake.
Absolutely.
Like I feel like that's another pivotal thing. Like I shouldn't talk about like my own parents, but like I know a lot of people, I'll be more anonymous, that like, you know, grew up in households where their parents like never apologized for anything that they did. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like a problem with the modern church too, is like pastors presenting themselves as if they are living without sin.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being above reproach is certainly important, but there's a lot of piety.
All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like especially the parent-child relationship, you know, certainly like teach your kids to respect you and understand that you are their authority, but you don't need to paint yourself as if you are the Jesus character in this story, because we have Jesus to be the Jesus character.
Exactly. That is so crucial. And God bless my wife. She is so good at that aspect, and I've learned so much from her, and still am. When she sins in front of our kids, she is so good at coming back to them and owning it and showing them, hey, mom needs the gospel just as much as you do.
Yeah.
And she is very good at coming to me on the side and saying, hey, I think you really hurt so-and-so's feelings with how you chose to interact in that moment, and I think it would be good for you to go and make amends. And that's not something that comes natural for me, because I'm like, well, hey, I'm the dad. I call the shots. And just to have her come and open up my heart to the necessity of humility and how much that means to my children, right? And my dad, you know, like I said, I love my dad, and I don't mind throwing him under the bus, right? Because we're all imperfect beings, right? But he didn't apologize a lot. And, you know, it's not like he went on these tirades where he tore the whole house up and then just never repented. But it was hard for me to understand the importance of repenting to my kids for wronging them, because I never really had that modeled to me. But to know the importance of it, and to see how Anna gets that heart connection with our kids in those moments was eye-opening to me, and something that was inviting to me as well, to make sure that they knew that dad needs the gospel just as much as you do, if not more. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So we want to hit Solomon. He gave advice to parents to train a child in the way they should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. That's from Proverbs 22:6. Raising and training a child within the context of this proverb means that it begins with the Bible. It begins with the Bible, as all Scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. Teaching children the truths of Scripture will make them wise for salvation, thoroughly equip them to do good works, prepare them to give an answer to everyone who asks them for a reason for their hope, and prepare them to withstand the onslaught of cultures bent on indoctrinating young people with secular values. The Bible tells us that children are a reward from God. It would certainly seem fitting then that we would heed Solomon's wise counsel to train them appropriately. In fact, the value that God placed on teaching our children the truth is clearly addressed by Moses, who stressed to his people the importance of teaching their children about the Lord and his commands and laws when he said, "Impress on them your children, talk about them when you sit at your home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them to your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your house and your gates." That's Deuteronomy 6:7-9. Moses' thoroughness underscores his deep concern that successive generations maintain obedience to God's laws to ensure they would live safely in the land, that all would go well with them, and that he would bless them in the land. That's what we're calling parents to.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I heard one of the pastors of our local church that we attend was talking about that the proverb, train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not stray from it. And he's like, wanted to make it a point to say, like, this is not a promise, this is
It's
a principle.
yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out
Yeah,
there.
very,
as well.
very true.
But certainly, this is not a subject that is handled lightly. I mean, from the very first books in the Bible all the way to the end, like, we are called to make disciples, raise our children well, teach them in the ways of Scripture, and to essentially be good stewards and good shepherds.
Yep.
And we even have examples of how to do that.
Yeah.
So really, like, the excuses have been removed.
Yeah, like many good things, right? Like, no temptation ever comes to man which God has not already given us the means to overcome it, right? And so I understand at the end of the day, especially for parents in this time, in this generation, where probably both parents are working, right? That happens a lot, and they're probably worn out. They're probably tired. They have countless amounts of stress and pressure and thoughts plaguing their mind. We live in a social media culture that doesn't set us free, but it puts all these pressures and bondages on us. We carry all that into the reality of how we're supposed to parent our kids. And what Mike and I are trying to say from the bottom of our hearts is that the most important role that you will play as parents, apart from the relationship that you have as husband and wife, is how you raise your children together, and raise them not with the newest thing, not with the iPhone 13, Pro. All of those things can be good things, but they can just as easily become idols or distractions. What your kids need from you more than anything, and I'll say this again, what your kids need from you more than anything is the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is eternally significant. Eternally significant. And we can't say that enough. I don't care if you miss the mark on their clothes, on their shoes, on the things that the world says are, of utmost importance. If you are nailing the gospel of Jesus Christ, you have given your children the very best thing you could ever provide for them. And to do that in such a way that they, like to Mike's point from earlier, right? Not only are they seeing you teach it, but they're seeing you live it out as well. You are validating the things that you're teaching by living it out in your own Christian walk, in your own Christian journey. And there's nothing more significant than that. And there's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing more important than that either.
Yeah. I don't know what to add to that, other than I'd like to say, a lot of people are really upset with the way things are in the world today. A lot of people really do want to make the world a better place. The problem is the way that people are trying to make the world a better place is by, like, going on the internet and arguing with people or arguing with family. And certainly I do that. I definitely do that. And I think that you can make the world a better place by preaching the gospel And by standing firmly on Scripture, I think that that is true. But if you want to make a lasting impression, if you really, really, really want to leave a legacy of making the world a better place, teach your children the gospel. Teach your children how to make disciples. Make disciples of your children and teach them how to make disciples. And then even outside of parenthood, make disciples. Teach them how to make disciples. It's really that simple. If you are upset with the way the world is, make disciples.
That's right. Mike, you nailed it, and I think it's of utmost importance. I don't think we could say it any differently or any better than we have. And so pray. If you feel ill-equipped to do this, pray. Ask God to help you become the kind of parent that you desire to be. I understand what it means to be overwhelmed. I understand what it means to feel ill-equipped. I understand, also what it means to feel like you're constantly getting it wrong and constantly overwhelmed. But the reality is that God desires for us to lean into Him, right? We don't get judged for doing it right. We get judged by God by how obedient we are in our effort, right?
Yeah.
Lean into the Holy Spirit. Allow Him to direct you. Allow Him to guide you. Allow Him to give you the discernment. And then walk it out with love. Love, listen, discern, respond. Raise your kids well.
Amen.
Mike, give us a shout out, buddy.
Until next time, remember that there's a perishing world out there. So do your part to ensure that they're hearing the truth. God bless you, Pilgrims. Stay pugnacious.